Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second 2018 OSEP Symposia series event, Increasing Capacity for Developing High-Quality IFPs and IFSPs. I'm Terry Jackson with the Office of Special Education Programs, and I'll be serving as your moderator for today's events. First, just a bit of information about the technology that we're using for the symposium. Participants will be muted throughout the symposium. We invite you to submit any questions to the Ask a Question box, and that's under the Q&A tab near the bottom of your screen. We'll try to address as many questions as possible during the Q&A session at the end of the event. Additional questions may be addressed in subsequent discussion opportunities, which can be assessed through the collaboration spaces. Now, for the best viewing experience, we recommend closing all other programs and internet browsers, including your email, throughout the symposium. If you do happen to lose audio or video, refreshing your browser, logging on through a different browser, or asking for help in the chat box is really helpful. Additional tech support information can be found at the symposium website. During this year's Symposia series, we're discussing the important role of developing and implementing high-quality IEPs and IFPs, and how it plays in ensuring that each child with a disability can be successful. The three-year symposium are interconnected. First, back in April, we laid the policy and research foundation to establish a common understanding and set of principles and the impact of the Andrew decision. And today, we will explore what high-quality IEPs mean in practice, specifically discussing what teachers, leaders, and IEP teams and how IEP teams need to develop and implement high-quality IEPs and how we can support these needs. And finally, in the fall, we'll learn about how education agencies, families, and other stakeholders are working together to develop and implement high-quality IEPs. Today's symposium will focus on increasing capacity for developing high-quality IEPs, IFSPs. We'll discuss supporting high-quality special education services to children with disabilities by addressing the capacity needs of educators, IEP teams, and administrators to develop and implement high-quality IEPs and conduct effective IEP meetings. Now, during this presentation, you'll hear from experts, including current OSEP grantees, as they discuss the impact of Andrew F. on IEP, IFSP development and meetings, an example from the Georgia State Personnel Development Grant working to improve their IEP process, the critical role of the school principal, IFSP considerations, behavior considerations, how national organizations can partner in supporting school success, and how students and families can successfully participate in the IEP process. All right, so let's get started with our first speaker. Now I'm proud to introduce our Assistant Secretary in the Office of Special Education Programs and Rehabilitative Services at the U.S. Department of Education, Johnny Collett. In this capacity, he serves as the advisor to the Secretary of Education on matters related to the education of children and youth with disabilities, as well as employment and community living for youth and adults with disabilities.
Thank you, Terry, and welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate you carving out time to participate in today's event, and my hope is that as a result of our time together this afternoon or this morning, wherever you may be, that you will have found it a time of rich conversation and a time of really renewed focus, and what we hope will lead in all of our cases and experiences to real improvement as we support states and local teams in developing and implementing quality individualized education programs and individualized family service plans. As Terry said in the first symposium, we did focus this year on the importance of IEPs and high expectations and appropriate supports. And today we'll focus on increasing capacity for developing and implementing high quality IEPs and IFSPs. Now, as we think about that, one could think that this is always a natural progression in the conversation around developing and implementing quality program plans for the infants and toddlers and children and youth with disabilities that we serve. However, the conversations, in my view, don't always extend so naturally. My experience has been that while we often talk about what kids need, which should always be our first and primary focus, we don't seem as often to extend that conversation to include what everyone in the system that serves them needs. So what everyone in the system that serves them needs, how we know that, how we know what those folks need, and then what we're going to do about it. These conversations and considerations must occur together if we're to realize the improved outcomes that we, and most importantly, the individuals that we serve, envision. So a couple things here from my perspective as you spend time together today and hear from different folks, and hope it's helpful that you know sort of where my head is around these things and sort of my view and lens into this. I think as many of you would agree, an IEP, an IFSP that is compliant with the law is foundational. However, an IEP, an IFSP that is merely compliant with the law will not by itself improve outcomes for kids. Developing and implementing quality IEPs and IFSPs includes, of course, determining the services and supports that children need, but I believe it must also include understanding and addressing the capacity needs of those in the system that serve those infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. So I think as you all would agree, and one of the things that we try very hard to highlight every day in our work in some way across OSERs is that primarily and ultimately, our work is about each individual child and their needs. It is about what's best for kids. It's about delivering on the promises that we've made to kids and families across this country. So I'm encouraging you today. I'm encouraging you in your work as this makes sense to you, but I want to be very specific. I'm encouraging you to rethink and question anything. That's right. Rethink and question anything that you believe puts you in a better position to serve the children who are in your care. So I don't have to tell you that the need is too great and the stakes are too high for us to not get this right. I understand and acknowledge the difficulties and constraints of what I'm suggesting. I've been a teacher, like many of you. I've worked in other settings. I've helped develop many IEPs, many program plans for kids, and done that within systems and bureaucracies and supported others who did. So I don't know every answer to every question, but on some level, I understand the constraints. I understand the challenges for extending these conversations to the places that I'm suggesting they must be extended if we're going to really achieve the outcomes we envision for those that we serve. So I understand those difficulties and constraints. But what I would share with you is something I try to remember myself each day, is that the presence of challenges does not remove our responsibility to do what's right by children. And it is incumbent on us. That's the you and me's of the world. That's you and me today. That's all of us. It is incumbent on us who have been charged with the care of this nation's children to figure out how to do better. So as we continue in our time together today, I'm encouraging you to do a few things. You'll know best how to make sense of this in your context. You'll know best what works for you and what doesn't. But within sort of what makes the most sense to you, let me encourage you to do a few things today. First of all, I want to encourage you to think big. You didn't carve out time today. You had to say no to something to say yes to this. You didn't carve out time today to think small, I imagine. So I want to encourage you to think big. But I want to encourage you not just to think. I want to encourage you to rethink. You say, well, Johnny, what do you want me to rethink? That's for you to decide, but let me offer you a framework. So rethink what you do. Rethink how you do it. Rethink when you do it. Rethink where you do it. Rethink with whom you do it. And maybe most importantly, rethink why you do it. So as we spend time together today, I want to encourage you to think. I want to encourage you to think big. I want you to encourage you to rethink. But then I do want to put a finer point on this. I want to encourage you to question anything and everything that could put you in a better position to serve the infants and toddlers, children and youth with disabilities in your care. And I want to encourage you to imagine what could be if as a nation we did not just enough to meet some requirement, but did the very best we could do in service to individuals with disabilities and their families. So I'm incredibly excited about the time you get to spend today, and incredibly excited about extending that conversation to the capacity issues that everyone in a system has and everyone in a system needs in order to deliver on the promises that we've made to kids and families across this country, and in order to ensure that they achieve the outcomes that we, and again, most importantly, they envision. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Terry, and thank you again for your time today.
Well, thank you, Johnny. Our goals here today are to leave you with three things: an understanding of how to increase the capacity, provide resources, provide examples to assist school leaders, teachers, service providers, and families to facilitate effective IEP meetings and develop high-quality IEPs and IFSPs. Now, before we continue, I just want to encourage everyone to read the full bios of each speakers, which are available on the OSEP Ideas That Work website. All of our presenters are undertaking fascinating work, and you're getting just a small glimpse of their achievements today. So next up is our next speaker is Dr. David Bateman, and he'll be describing the impact of Andrew F. on IEP, IFSP meetings and development. Dr. Bateman is a professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Special Education at Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania, where he teaches courses about learning disabilities, special education, and special education law to future teachers and administrators. Dr. Bateman has been in the classroom teacher of students with learning disabilities, behavior disorders, intellectual disabilities, and hearing impairments. Dr. Bateman.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. Before I begin, I want to sincerely encourage all individuals to observe the previous webinar that was put out on this. The information that was provided in that was well done, succinct, and especially the information that was provided relating to the history of the Andrew F. decision. That lays all the foundation for many of the things we're talking about today. Put these two together. Don't view them as singular webinars. Make sure you watch one and then compare the others. I'm here talking to you about following up on what Mitch Yell talked about, laying the history of the foundation of why we are relating to the Andrew F. decision. Go back, review his section of that specifically, and you can see very specific why we're talking about that and what we're talking about today so that we can have some discussions of this. My focus today is talking about IEP teams and then moving on from there. So, right? Okay. Just to lay the foundation, before we go into some more of the implications, is just to remind everyone, not to talk down to you, but just to remind, so we're all talking about the exact same thing. The primary requirements of the IDEA is to provide a special education that confers a free, appropriate public education. Using that as the foundation for what we're talking about, not only in the previous webinar, but also today in the third webinar, please make sure that you understand this is the foundation for where we are going and why this is so very important for what we're doing. And this is one of the basics of what we're talking about, and keep this as our focus where we are. Okay. I'm going to build on what Mitch Yell said about the Supreme Court decision. A little over a year ago, which came out of surprise, as I wasn't expecting it on that day, the Supreme Court issued a unanimous decision. And what it said very specifically, to meet its substantive obligations under the IDEA, a school must offer an IEP reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. Now, go back and see what Mitch said about the history of this, but it's really important to use this as our foundation for the implications that I'm going to be addressing. Because building on this, we can really have a better understanding of what we need to do as IEP and IFSP teams in order to appropriately identify and provide services for kids with disabilities. Okay. So let me just go. I've got several important points, and we'll follow it up with some specific guidelines that I want to recommend for you. All right. The first important point, and this is a really important, very, very important one, is that the Supreme Court rejected the de minimis or trivial educational benefit standard. There was a dispute as a part of the arguments that were heard in the Supreme Court that day, and I was there. It was a very cold day. I remember having to line up for it. But it was as a part of that is there was a dispute versus what the parents were seeking and what the school district was seeking. And the Supreme Court came firmly down on the side close to what the parents were seeking, but firmly rejected the de minimis or basic educational standard. And this is very important because what we're expecting now is we're expecting kids to actually make progress. Okay? So you can see this. And this is, again, a direct quote from what the Supreme said. A student offering an educational program providing merely more than de minimis progress from year to year can hardly be said to be offered an education at all. The reason we're doing this is to make sure that kids with disabilities, who have disabilities at no fault of their own, are actually provided services and not just warehoused in a school. And what we need to do is make sure that they're provided a service that can help them reach their potential as we work to provide services for them. Now, what's important about this, and this is we have to read this decision. Remember, the Supreme Court issued its decision in Rowley back in 1982, shortly after the original signing of the law that we now are working to implement. It's been a long time of us dealing with the Rowley decision, but what we have to think about is the Rowley decision, the NRF decision, did not replace or overturn Rowley. So those of you who, as a part of your special education training programs, studied the Rowley decision, it clarified the standard. It clarified and extends the standard and helps us understand exactly where we need to be going as a part of this, and helps us understand what we need to be doing to help implement this. It doesn't overturn. Please make sure. People were thinking there was going to be overturning this. Not at all. It just helps clarify and helps build on this. Okay. Now, what's important about this is the Supreme Court's decision emphasizes progress. That's what we're expected to do with kids. That's the demand that we have. That's why we're doing what we do. We want kids to make progress. And that's what we're expected to do as teachers and as professionals. And that's what we'll be talking about some of the implications of that in a few minutes. But what I want to make sure that you understand is our job is for kids to make progress. And we need to arrange it so that kids can make progress and that kids receive a service from which they benefit from. That is a very important thing. Now, it's hard to think about this, but what we have to think about is make sure, based on the child's unique circumstances, that kids do actually make progress. Building on that, there's some additional points that I want to address. Okay. Now, talking about what I was saying earlier, okay, the Rowley standard, and talking about the two parts, how I said we did not overturn Rowley, but I want to look at this, and I want all IEP teams to pay attention to this. There's basically a two-part definition to a FAPE that extends Rowley, and we all now when many of us are now calling the Rowley-Andrews standard. This is important because what this is helping us clarify as IEP teams what we need to be thinking about and making sure that we understand with this. The first part, in the development of the IEP, has the IEP team complied with the procedures set forth in the IDEA? And for many of us, that's an easier standard to understand, and it's easier for us to understand and implement, because what we're having to focus on is the team following, are they meeting the timelines? Are they paying attention to making sure that they have the right people in the room? Do they have data from the appropriate individuals to include as a part of the child's present levels? Do they have these things? Those are easier checkoff things than the second standard. And that's something that many of us who've been involved in special education understand. We've been dealing with the standards and understanding this. That doesn't change. The standards are what they are, and we've been living with them, continue to deal with them. The second, though, this is the harder one to understand. This is the harder one for districts to actually wrap their heads around. Is the IEP reasonably calculated to enable the child to make progress that is appropriate in light of his or her circumstances? Now, the term his or her circumstances is a direct quote from the Supreme Court decision written by Chief Justice Roberts. Why I'm talking about this is you have to think about this. There is no formula for this. It's based on the individual needs of the child. And why we're talking about this is this first part of these two standards. The first part is easy, much easier to understand. The second part, though, is the IEP reasonably calculated? And with that, then we can make a determination if the kid is actually making progress or doing this. That's what we're going to be wrestling with. And that's something that we're going to have to clarify as a part of this. Okay. The next point. Okay. Now, what's important, and this is something that all school district administrators, teachers need to be aware of, is that the Andrew decision provides guidance to administrators, educators, IEP team members in developing IEPs that meet the Andrew standard. The Andrew standard has been, the Andrew court, the decision raised the standard of what we are expecting for teachers and teams to do for kids with disabilities. No longer, as I said earlier, no longer can we have kids just barely make progress. We are expecting kids actually to have teams spend time finishing and calculating and trying to determine what can we do to arrange it so kids can be successful. That is our obligation, and that's what we're focusing on, and that's what we need to do, and that's what we need to spend our time on. This is a very important part of the process. We need to make sure that all IEP teams are aware of this. And this is not just for special ed directors. This is not just for special education teachers. This is not just for principals who are serving as local education agency representatives or general education teachers. This is a team decision. We need to be part of a team in developing this and make sure that the IEPs reflect the new higher standard of which we're expecting IEPs to be addressed for all kids, not just some kids, all kids. And that's a very important part of the process. Okay? Okay. So next, so we think about this. As a part of an IEP team, we need to make sure that we're focus on the particular child as a part of the core of the IDEA. Every single decision for a child needs to be focused on their needs based on their individual needs. Not on their needs based on their disability, but based on the needs of the individual that this child presents. So the instruction offered must be specially designed to meet a child's unique needs through the IEP program. An IEP is constructed only after careful consideration of the child's present level of achievement, disability, and potential for growth, which this is going to raise the expectations for the determination of more accurate present levels. In order for us to determine whether a child's actually making progress, we're going to need to have clearer present levels so that we have to have better data from individuals so that we can make determinations. Is a child actually being taken from where they were to where they need to go? And then how are we actually making that determination? You can only do this by making sure that you have accurate present level data that helps us understand what's going on as part of this. I'll hit on this in a minute, but pay attention to making sure we talk about the child's potential for growth. This is a conversation that we have to have as IEP teams with parents, because there's some individuals who think that just because a kid has a disability that they're not expected to make growth. Now we have to think about, we have to arrange it, as I just said about a minute and a half ago, arrange it so kids can be successful. That is our obligation as professionals, and that's what we need to do to make sure that kids receive there's growth and there is progress as a part of this. Okay. So some very specific lessons. Now, I want to make sure that you understand. Pay attention to the lessons from Andrew, and make sure that you tell your staff. Make sure you tell your principals. Make sure you tell your general and special education teachers about this, and make sure you explain to the parents as a part of this. Because there are some very specific lessons that we need to understand that we can clarify as a part of this, because there are some things that we need to address that understand and will lay the foundation for kids as we're going to make sure that they're receiving services. This lays everything out. So go back, and as a part of the resources that we have for you, there are some very specific resources. It includes some background in the information on the decision, but also then pay attention to those as we talk about the lessons. Okay? So the first lesson, right? The IEP must be drafted in compliance with a detailed set of procedures that emphasize collaboration among parents and educators. Emphasize the IEP team must be drafted in compliance under a detailed set of procedures. That's the first part of the Rowley-Endrew decision, the two-part decision that I was talking about just a few minutes ago. Pay attention to the specific procedures. We follow the timelines, we follow the procedures, and we make sure that all the individuals are in the room and can provide appropriate information as a part of this kid, and we can then make determinations based on this. Now, one thing we want to emphasize, and you can see the second part of the sentence is a direct quote from the Supreme Court decision. Emphasize collaboration among parents and educators. Parents play a big role in a child's education. And we need to make sure that we allow the parents not only to participate, but we also listen to the parents and we pay attention to the parents' questions as a part of this, that we address the parents' needs and we make sure that the parents are part of the whole decision-making progress. The Supreme Court was really very clear about the role of making sure that parents are part of the team. And we need to make sure that we listen to parents and address the parents' needs and address what's going on as a part of that. Okay? Next, okay? The nature of the IEP process, from initial consideration through the state administrative procedures, ensures that parents and school representatives will fully air their respective opinions on the degree of progress the IEP should pursue. Now, this is a very important point. Why am I saying this? Is make sure that parents are given the opportunity to share their information, that parents are able to, we listen to parents and we really pay attention to what their dreams, their desires, their hopes are for their child. As a parent of 2 kids, I understand that your parenting doesn't end. Most of my kids are now hopefully doing well. But it's interesting about this. I share with you that parenting doesn't end. And pay attention to this when the parents walk in. For many IEP teams, they often participate in 20, 30 IEP teams during the course of the year. But for parents, this is their one time that they come. Take it very seriously. Pay attention. They've taken time off from work. They've taken time to come into a school, and we need to make sure that we listen to what they have to say. And we don't just say to them, oh, this is my fourth IEP of the day. Can we get this over done quickly? Give them the time and listen to them so they fully air what's going on as a part of this. Pay attention to what they have to say and honor what they have to say. Okay? Second point, okay? You understand this also. I'm starting with the emphasis on the parents. Ensure meaningful parent involvement in IEP meetings and that their concerns are considered in establishing their child's educational behavioral goals. Make sure we listen to what the parents have to say specifically about what their education. If they really want to focus on reading, or they really want to focus on behaviors, or if they really want to focus on social competence areas, pay attention. NRF covers not just academic things, it also comes behaviors. And we need to make sure that we address behavioral issues as a part of this. And for parents, that's often what we need to address and spend our time focusing on. And for general education teachers, that's often what we feel that they need to address, is any issues relating to behavior goals for kids with disabilities. Okay, next. Okay, now the IEP is not a form document. It is not a document that we write, because as all of you know who've been working involved in IEP teams, we write and then we have to revise it again next year. It's not something we write and then 350 and put on a shelf and look at it 350 days later, then to rewrite it again. This is not a form document. It's constructed only after careful consideration of a child's present levels and potential. And what we need to think about as a part of that is making sure that as a part of addressing the kids' needs, that we don't just check the boxes, that we actually pay attention to the individual needs of the child. Emphasize the I of the IEP. Focusing on that the child has individual specific needs that we need to pay attention to. But also, I emphasize this very specifically, the child's potential for growth. We're addressing not just where they are, but where they potentially will be going. That's a very important part of the process. Okay. Next thing. Right? And this is, I alluded to this just a few minutes ago. When developing the content of a student's IEP and subsequently reviewing it, be sure that the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, the PLAF statements, are based on evaluations and other relevant data that are current. And make sure that we have current data, not just data. And I've seen teams develop really good evaluations on these children and then incorporate that as a part of the present levels, but then do not change based on what's going on 1, 2, even 3 years later. Make sure that you have current data from the general education teacher, the special education teacher, anyone else who works with the child, so we have understanding of where they are. Use the data that we have from the previous evaluations, but also then update them and provide information, not only the information from the teachers, but any additional information you may have from the parents or the nurses, anyone who may have come in contact with the child, so we have a better understanding where it is. But make sure the data is current. Next. Okay. Right. Ensure annual IEP goals are challenging, appropriately ambitious, and measurable. And I say that like I have marbles in my mouth, but measurable is something we need to make sure that we actually address, that is something that we can actually quantify and demonstrate. I don't want to hear that a child has a reading goal where we just to clarify that he seems like he's doing okay, or that's good, or I want to see goals that we can actually, someone else can measure. It's not a misstatement that kids with disabilities, many of them are transient. And what we have to make sure is the IEPs that we write can be picked up from one location to another, and that others can then view what's going on specifically with this child, because the IEP is their living, breathing plan that we then need to address and provide assortment assistance to them as a part of that. Okay. Next, the IEP must be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of his or her circumstances. This is, again, a direct quote from the Supreme Court. They said there is no form, there is no formula that we have to address as a part of this. We need to make sure that children make progress. Okay. Next. Okay. Next. As I alluded to before, it's not just something we put on a shelf just for 350 days and then rewrite because we have to do it annually. Continuously monitor and measure a child's progress and make sure that the annual goals are applicable and demonstrate that progress has been made. This is one of the most important things that IEP teams need to focus on, is determine whether a child is making progress and then whether we're doing what we're supposed to be doing as a part of this. We need to make sure that we adjust what we're doing with the kids. And if the kid is not making progress, change something, change the grouping, change the instruction, change the reading method, change the level of instruction, change the amount of time, change something. That is contingent upon IEP teams to do this. It's not contingent upon parents, because parents aren't often in schools and understand exactly what's going on. Make sure things are changed based on the progress or lack thereof that the child is making. Okay. Now, okay. And this again, building on this one, this is probably the most important point. I'm involved in due process hearings all the time. And one thing I'm going to make sure is we need to have data that talks about kids making changes. So when I said making changes, when progress reports don't identify where the data is making changes, we need to make sure that we reconvene the IEP team, make instructional changes, change something. It's contingent. We don't need these kids to suffer anymore. We need to make sure what we're doing for these kids is appropriate, that progress is being made. And if progress is not being made, we need to alter it so that progress does be made. That is our obligation. And we need to take that very seriously, because if we don't take that seriously, no one else will. Okay. And the last thing I want to emphasize is that we have some resources here, but one of the best things that you can read, and this is a resources as a part of the USDO website that we have as a part of this, is make sure you read the Q&A on the document on the NREF decision that was issued on December 7th, 2017. This is really well done, and I highly recommend that you share this with your team. Thank you very much. Okay.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bateman. Very passionate for what he presented. I know some of the takeaways that I had from it was enabling the child to make progress, the use of accurate and current data, making sure that your IEPs are in compliance with a detailed set of procedures, and also meaningful collaboration with parents. Again, that entry document, decision document isn't on this particular symposium, but it was posted on the collaboration site after the first symposium. So if you don't have it, please go to the resources after that first symposium. Next up, our next presenter is Dr. Laura Brown. Dr. Brown is the project director for Georgia State Personnel Development Grant. In her role, she has worked with state and regional leaders to develop infrastructures and capacity to sustain initiatives. Dr. Brown.
Thank you so much for allowing me to share today. We want to talk to you about Aspire. Active student participation inspires real engagement. Next. Aspire is a student-led IEP initiative designed to develop self-determination skills in several areas, including problem-solving, self-evaluation, choice-making, and decision-making. This is a student-directed process, and it shifts the focus from the adults to the student. Students have much more involvement in educational decision-making. Next. In Aspire, we have particular competencies, and we share these competencies with the students, with the educators, and with their parents. IEP awareness. There are several aspects of IEP awareness that we take for granted that students understand, but we consciously teach those. We teach IEP participation, IEP content, knowledge of strengths and challenges, and communication skills. These competencies are addressed in the context of classroom instructional activities every day. For example, students may be asked to identify things they've done to prepare for their IEP meeting and what else they can do. They also are looking and talking with their parents about what are the participation needs of the student and where can they really step up to take a leadership role. In communication skills, we are doing that ongoing each and every day, and the students are using their mode of communication to make that happen. Next. Through this whole entire process with Aspire, we are increasing student voice. And this is really all about rethinking what we've done in the past. We are helping students define strengths and challenges and truly expressing their interests, likes, and dislikes. We are helping students practice communication and negotiation skills, engaging in goal setting, evaluating progress, and expressing how to adjust activities accordingly to meet those goals. For example, negotiation skills might take a lot of work. Have to ramp up your listening skills. Have to pay attention to what the other person is saying. You might need to anticipate what's going to happen and learn the art of compromise. Aspire has a very positive focus, and students are always being asked what they want to do in the future and what do they need to do to get there. What compromises do they need to make? How do they need to work toward their goals? And what we're also finding is that they are learning to not only ask for the supports they need, but to express why they truly need them. Throughout Aspire, the entire process, students are learning to make choices, decisions, and taking more control over their educational decision-making. Within this process of increasing student voice, we're partnering with families. We're partnering with those parents, and sometimes adults may find this difficult. Our educators may find this difficult of increasing student voice because it is a new way of work. Next. It does require training, and it does require follow-up activities, including coaching, to enable students to actively participate in the development and implementation of their IEP. This training includes overview and expectations. It includes training of what really is self-determination and strategies to get there, and how do you self-advocate. Participating in the student-led IEP process is also part of the training. And we have administrator, educator, and parent sessions. Sometimes we have them all together. Sometimes we have separate sessions. But we find it so important that this training and this coaching is really part of the process. Our state personnel development grant helped us get started and helped us provide that coaching and develop a state infrastructure and move to a regional support level. Throughout this process, we are working with other partners to expand our work and to make sure that we can sustain this work across Georgia. We are partnering with Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, the division of our CTAE, our Career Technical Agricultural Education Division, Tools for Life, bringing all of these together to expand our work and make it very meaningful for the students, their parents, and the educators. Next. Aspire promotes educator engagement, parent engagement, student engagement, but we're also finding that it promotes post-school outcomes and secondary transition. As we work together with all of our partners, and as we work to build our infrastructure and to take our work to the next level, to leverage resources and supports and pull all of this together, we know that Aspire is doing really great work, and we're having significant results from that work. And we're seeing as part of our other efforts, seeing our graduation rates increase. You'll see at the bottom of this slide, I snipped this from a student's IEP presentation. And this particular high school student made some introductory remarks. And she talked a little bit about herself. She's shy, reserved, but then confidently, she turned away from her PowerPoint presentation. And she turned to that IE committee and she said, "And this is my IEP." I knew then I was seeing Aspire truly in action. We have some great numbers. We have participating schools. We have just shy of 600 schools participating in Aspire as of March. We have 112 districts who are participating, and we have 2,600, just shy of 2,700 teachers who have gone through our training. That leads us to 38,000 plus students who are participating in Aspire, who are leading their own IEP at whatever level is possible for them, who are becoming leaders, self-directing, self-determined, and advocating for themselves. Now, we do have some resources for you, and we encourage you to check out our website. We have success stories. We have some videos, and we have our manual. You can follow this process, but I would say, think about the coaching that is needed. Think about what it really takes to support and sustain an effort like this. And as we rethink our work in Georgia, we welcome to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. It's great to see how a state program is increasing student engagement. Earlier, we listened to how about the policy and family engagement. Now we saw Georgia, just listen to Georgia and how they're using a program to involve students in the IEP process through regional partnerships. Next up, we have Dr. Sarah Milton, who is the principal of Beverly Manor Middle School in Augusta County, Virginia. Dr. Milton has just completed her 11th year as an administrator for Augusta County Public Schools, where she served as a special education administrator and school testing coordinator, as well as a school-based 504 coordinator and an assistant principal. Dr. Milton.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm honored to be here today to speak from the perspective of principals as the instructional leaders in their building. My first role as an administrator was the special education administrator in the school, and it was during that time that I realized the importance of having an administrator leader be invested in the time in the instruction for that particular population of students, and then in turn how that can impact and enhance the instruction for all. The role of the principal as the instructional leader of the building starts with setting high expectations for student achievement. You cannot have high standards of student achievement without engaging in rigorous instruction. And we all know that that starts with rigorous and meaningful learning goals. And this should be especially true for the students with the most complex needs in order for them to make true progress. We have rigorous state standards that we are expected to get our students to achieve, and that in turn drives our instructional expectations and practices in our buildings. Special education should not be a separate entity within this or something that we delegate to someone else in our building. The principal is the person who is ultimately responsible for the education in the building, and that includes setting high expectations for student learning for all students. Again, this begins with the individual goals, and obviously in context today, we're talking about the IEP goals. It also includes ensuring effective IEP meetings and the development of the IEP that results in high quality IEPs, and then the further implementation of those IEPs and what that instruction looks like in our schools. The IEP is the living document, and the purpose behind the goals and services should be to enclose that instructional or behavioral gap that exists for students with an IEP. As a school, if we are not setting rigorous goals, then we simply end up maintaining the gap that exists year after year, or worse, we see it widen as students get older. This can be very defeating. Students can become apathetic about their own learning, or worse, they become too reliant on adults and others and the lower expectations from them in the classroom. This is not the cycle we want to produce, and breaking that cycle starts by expecting these students to achieve, by expecting them to learn. And that comes from setting those rigorous and meaningful goals. We also need to expect our teachers to provide meaningful instruction toward these goals, and expecting the students and their parents to be partners in this process. Rigorous goals need to be based on their specific barrier skills, and those need to be identified by appropriate and current data collection. So how do we do this? And specifically as the instructional leader in the building, how do we facilitate that? In my experience, I think that sometimes school administrators take a little bit more of a hands-off approach when it comes to special education than maybe the other instructional areas in our building. And it doesn't tend to be our area of expertise or maybe even our comfort level. And I think some of that comes from not having all of our own personal experiences within that setting, as we have with our other classes. This is also an area of high specialization. And so there's a lot of trust in our highly specialized and trained special education teachers, as there should be. However, there also tends to be sometimes maybe too many assumptions made about the specialized instruction being provided and the data collection and the IEP development. And we need to be more directly involved in that process. Special education teachers are highly trained professionals, but we have the advantage of the instructional big picture for these students in our schools. We wouldn't leave the math department to create their own curriculum and their own assessments and watch progress monitoring without setting those expectations from us, monitoring that instruction that's happening, and looking at the student outcomes from that instruction. Special education should be no different, and in fact should probably ask for more of our time. We need to remember that as the instructional leader, we need to ask those same driving assessment questions for our special education as we do for all other areas of instruction. What kind of data do we need? How do we collect that data in order to identify those specific needs? How do we design that instruction based on those identified needs and then monitor progress? How often do we need to collect data? What kind of tools should we be using? And are we using them with fidelity? Several years ago in my own building, I know that I noticed my teachers were using multiple tools of measurement, all valid tools, all research-based tools, but we were probably using too many that confused the data that we were collecting. And we weren't always using these tools for their intended purpose. If we were using the same tools, we weren't always using the same language for reporting progress, which made it difficult to have a clear understanding of that student's progress from year to year. At that point, as the instructional leader, I pulled that team together. We sat down and we decided we needed to create a more clear data collection plan, in which we created an assessment plan starting from initial baseline data collection all the way through progress monitoring data collection, including what tools we're going to be using, how often we would use them. And then from there, I needed to see what additional training I needed to set up for my teachers to ensure the accurate use of those tools. We also address the need for common language for reporting data and progress. Not only did these efforts improve our data collection process, it has led to more accurate IEPs and goal development. It's also worked to improve discussion and communication with parents. When we use consistent language and consistent processes for developing those annual goals, which then in turn drives our instruction and our service delivery. We need to remember sometimes that in these IEP meetings, we use these terminology and these data collection tools on a daily basis. We live in this language, and oftentimes our parents do not. So we need to make sure that we can make that process as consistent as possible and as clear as possible in order to make parents feel comfortable in order to participate in meetings and the development all along before we even come to the table. For us, there is also a need to develop a process for developing the goals and monitoring goals. Sometimes I think developing a goal can be a little daunting depending on the behaviors that we're looking at or the instructional models that we need to look at. This is a process that can be facilitated by administrators to bring your special education department together. This does not have to be a process that they do in isolation. We look at goals together and decide, is there a clear criteria for success? Is there a defined mastery? Is it clear how the goal is going to be measured? And then what will that instruction look like? From that point, my teachers also see that I'm invested in this process, and these are the things that I will be looking for in the classroom as well. There needs to be regular discussion about student progress, not just the quarterly report that goes home to parents, but as an instructional team with ongoing discussion with the parents. Are students making progress? Why or why not? And then developing an action plan that involves discussion with the parents before we're even developing the next draft. There should be the expectation for frequent data collection from the division down to the schools. 1 to 2 data points collected weekly. We cannot afford to wait for a length of time before we realize students are not making progress and adjusting instruction. Consistency for this starts at the division level. I'm fortunate enough that I work for a division that has a very clear vision of what they see for education for our students and those high expectations. They've set those specific timelines, expectations for us, guidelines, process guides, but that division leadership relies on the individual principals to implement, monitor, and ensure that IEP meetings are effective and the process results in an IEP that continues to set high expectations for student progress. Division leaders also rely on the school principals to ensure the implementation of sound instructional practices that result in high student achievement. So again, this includes all instructional areas. There's a need to take ownership of this process and not just as a required member of the IEP team. The building principal needs to be more than just the signature on the participation page. With multiple case managers in your building, managing multiple students and their families across multiple grade levels, it's the building administrator that is the common thread throughout the process as students progress throughout your school. Our role should be quality control in a sense, ensuring consistency in IEP development, discussions leading up through that development, documentation, and facilitating discussion during the meetings. Our role in the building dictates a different level of authority. And so with that comes a great responsibility to understand the IEP process, not just for compliance for teachers or making sure that we've met those deadlines and making sure that we've met those minimal pieces, but also to be able to interact and discuss students' progresses and performances with their families. This helps to ensure that not only are the required components, deadlines met, but that the plan becomes part of a continuum of an educational plan for that student that progresses toward their long-term goals of closing that gap. One way is to look at and have a process for looking at IEPs before they even go home, having those ongoing discussions with the case managers about student process and progress, looking for appropriate goals, well-documented present level of performance, and clear and current data that allows any reader to understand that student's progress and current needs. As principals, we need to continue to monitor this quality and meet with case managers discussing our students and be sure we are consistent throughout our school building. Administrators are the consistent piece in a student's time within our buildings, and with that mindset, we also have the opportunity to build relationships and trust with our families as we participate not just at the yearly meetings, but as we work together in setting high expectations for students and providing the services and support to meet them. So high expectations and IEP development are just two of the three critical pieces that a building administrator provides in regards to quality special education that results in true progress. The third is providing the necessary support to special education and general education teacher teams in order to actually implement the IEP and then monitor that instruction as it moves forward in the classroom. This really begins with scheduling and the approach and design of the master schedule all the way down to the individual student schedules. Sometimes I've been in conversations and all of the new technology that we have as schools that are designed to help us schedule our students faster, more efficiently. It's not always the best thing for these students with these complex scheduling needs. We've sometimes heard that it gets frustrating when special education becomes the tail that wags the dog. But we need to remember that education is not about being perfectly equal. It's about making sure that all students have what they need. And so my question typically when I met with that response is, why wouldn't you work first on scheduling the most complex needs in your building? And that's sometimes our students with special education needs, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's students with other needs. But why wouldn't we start with those complex needs first and ensure that all of those pieces are in place for them to be successful? The other pieces fall into place beyond that. Otherwise, we're trying to fit the very square peg into a round hole, and we tend to miss things that these students need in order to make true progress. There's no magic wand other than time and commitment to attention to detail in order to ensure that our schedule enables the amount of service time needed. There should not be a set master schedule for special education. It should change every year based on the needs that are within your building that year. The IEPs are what determine that, and they should determine how many sections of resource reading or resource math or co-taught language arts that you need in your building. When we look at beyond that into the instruction in the classroom, co-teaching, for example, we all know that ideally co-teaching inclusive classrooms, our co-teachers come to co-teaching and can choose that who they're working with, and there's an immediate commitment to that co-teaching process. But we also know that in reality, that's not always the case. It's not always possible. So again, this is where the building administrator needs to step in to play an active role in order to ensure the success of these co-teaching teams and ultimately the success of the students in that classroom. Principals should plan to invest the time to meet with their co-teaching partners in order to set expectations for both instructional roles in the classroom, with an emphasis on how both teachers can enhance instruction in that setting and both teachers own the instruction in that setting. This is a unique relationship that takes time to develop. Takes time to develop trust, takes time to develop those logistics in the classroom, and oftentimes it needs a facilitator. That's our role. The role of the principal should also be to provide access to co-teaching resources for both teachers in working toward building a culture of parity in the classroom. Principals can encourage and arrange for both teachers to attend workshops for professional development that can develop a plan for ongoing discussion and evaluation of the instruction that's happening in those settings in order to help with instructional planning and ensure meaningful instruction is happening, service time and service delivery is met, and to work on monitoring student goals. When building a master schedule, co-teachers must have a co-planning time. This is crucial and essential in order to build that ownership between the two teachers and develop that relationship. How they use that time and the expectation of how that time addresses service delivery and design of instruction, that comes from the expectations of the building administrator. Beyond the meetings and facilitating that further professional development, there's a need for monitoring the performance in the classroom. A building principal should be approaching special education like any other educational classroom in their building. Good instruction is good instruction. It should be aligned to specific student learning objectives, engaging and challenging instructional activities that lead to student growth. For my own staff, I know that my expectation is that their lesson plans should include the specific IEP goals that are being addressed, and the instructional delivery should be aligned to those goals. In the case of a co-taught classroom, the design of the instruction and choice of co-teaching models should really clearly be connected to the service delivery model and should enhance the instruction within that setting. And again, when we go back to that universal design, this in turn enhances instruction for all. Both teachers should be held accountable for the instruction within that setting. And this can be done through a variety of observational tools, post-observation conferences, ongoing data collection of what the actual instruction looks like in the classroom, and the follow-up conversations truly complete the cycle of setting those high learning expectations and the critical roles that a principal plays from setting those expectations through the IEP development, ensuring a quality IEP meeting, and finally, high quality outcomes for student achievement in the classroom. So again, education is not the one size fit all, and we all know that. But as building principals, we need to prioritize the amount of time we devote to student achievement, and the greatest needs necessitate the greatest time and attention from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Milton. A true testament to great school leadership. She's an exemplar of a great principal does in a school to provide high expectations, the use of data, and just making sure that all needs of students are being met. And just a little note that Augusta County is, just to show you a testament to Dr. Milton's commitment, is 3 hours west of Washington, D.C. So she made the commitment to drive 3 hours to be here, and it'll be 4 hours going home. So there you have it. Next up, we have Dr. Toby Long. Dr. Toby Long is a professor in the Department of Pediatrics at Georgetown University and a training director of the Center for Child and Human Development, University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. She's also the director of the Graduate Certificate Program in Early Intervention offered by Georgetown and director of the Comprehensive System of Personnel Development for the District of Columbia's Early Intervention Program called Strong Start. Big mouthful. That's all.
Good afternoon. Like my colleagues, I want to thank the Department of Education for having me here and hopefully sharing some key information about the individualized family service plans and early intervention for children from 0 to 3. I want to first thank my colleagues at the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center for some of their resources that I used in preparing this presentation on high quality IFSPs. So as we know, early intervention is a system of integrated services and supports for families to help them help their children participate in activities that they would like them to participate in or that are expected to participate in. Key to those that program is creating a high quality IFSP that reflects the families and other caregivers' concerns, priorities, and resources. High quality IFSPs clearly relate services to outcomes. And this is a very key message in developing high quality IFSPs. First, the team, which includes the family, decides on what the IFSP outcomes are, those outcomes that we would like our children to achieve. And then we decide which services and supports are necessary to help the child and family achieve those outcomes. So in order to reflect those priorities, concerns of the children and the families, high quality IFSPs have outcomes that are measurable with clearly stated criteria, procedures, and timelines. In developing IFSP outcomes, there is one key question we must ask our families. We start the conversation with, what would you like your child or family to do over the next several months that we can help you accomplish? By asking that question, we can develop either child-related outcomes or family-related outcomes. Child-related outcomes can either be participation-based or resource or routine-based outcomes. Key to the child outcomes is that achievement will enhance learning through functional participation in everyday activities, which is key concepts that will be reflected in the whole IFSP and certainly reflected in the services and supports given to the child and families to support the IFSP. We could also have family outcomes that oftentimes IFSP teams forget about. But there are two types of IFSP family outcomes that include participation-based outcomes or resource-based outcomes. And these are developed to help families support their own child by enhancing their capacity or enhancing their ability to access community services and supports outside of the early intervention system. Either family outcomes or child outcomes are developed using a certain procedure that focuses on participation. And Robin McWilliams has developed a four-step process in developing participation-based outcomes. Key to that, those participation-based outcomes and that process is the third word rule. The third word rule states that in IFSP outcomes, on every IFSP outcome, the third word is an action word. It's contextualized and it's functional. Okay? So for example, we could have that the child will eat the meal with this family, or that the child will point to certain pictures in a book during reading time. No matter if the outcomes are family or child related, the high quality IFSP outcome will be functional for the child and family's life, reflect real life situations, should be written in jargon-free language, clear and simple so everyone understands what we mean. An IFSP outcome emphasizes the positive, not the negative. So we always write that the child will do something, not that they won't do something. And we use active action words rather than passive words. So you should never see on an IFSP that a child will receive a certain service. That's not a participation-based outcome. So when developing child outcomes, when a parent says to you, I wish he, a child with cerebral palsy, could sit in his high chair without slipping out. A child participation-based outcome could be Romeo will eat meals with his family sitting upright in his high chair. Not that Romeo will improve his muscle tone for sitting. When a parent says, we want to be able to take Romeo with us in a car, we need a travel car seat. A family outcome could be Karen and Mark will explore options for financial assistance to obtain a car seat, rather than the service coordinator or the staff will find out how the family can buy a car seat. High quality IFSPs start with collecting information from families on what they care about, what they need to help them as a family accomplish and do the kind of activities they would like to do as a family, so that they can help their child grow, develop, and participate. IFSP teams use that information to create meaningful, functional, participation-based IFSPs that reflect those needs. That is a working document that changes over time. We're working with very young children that hopefully change very rapidly. We must feel that the IFSP will change over the course of our time working with them. It takes practice for IFSP teams to develop high-quality participation-based outcomes. And there are resources that have been developed to help us do that, including ones that are developed from the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, which provides lots of activities and practice on developing these kinds of outcomes. So I would suggest that you take advantage of these resources and other resources that are available, freely available to you at all times. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Long. Next up, we have Dr. Renee Bradley, who will focus on behavioral considerations. Dr. Bradley joined the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs back in 1997. I just want to emphasize that for you. As a program specialist, and now serves as the Deputy Director of the Research and Practice Division. I also want to thank Dr. Bradley for stepping in on such short notice to present on this part of the symposium. Dr. Bradley?
Thank you, Terry. So states and districts and schools are engaged in systematic and comprehensive efforts to make schools safe and effective learning environments for all children. For children with disabilities whose behavior interferes with their learning or the learning of others, the IEP is a valuable and critical part of the plan for teaching student behavior that's necessary for school success. Some of these slides might look a little familiar to you because we shared them last year when we focused on creating positive and safe learning environments. But we wanted to reiterate, in light of talking about the IEP, that the IEP, high quality IEPs are not limited just to academic and developmental performance of children. During an IEP team meeting, IEP teams are encouraged to consider the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports for students, including social, emotional, or behavioral goals and objectives on an IEP is not limited to a specific category or label. In fact, many children with disabilities need extra support with skills such as building independence, improving on-task behavior, improving attention, and other self-regulation activities. For example, a goal could be Brianna returns to independent assignments within 1 minute of a teacher prompt 80% of the time. When a child displays inappropriate behaviors, such as violating school code, student conduct, or disrupting the classroom, this may indicate that the behavioral supports should be included in the IEP. If an IEP team is aware of behaviors that interfere with a child's learning or the learning of others, that behavior should be addressed as part of the IEP, especially if there is a pattern of behavior that results in the child being removed from the instructional environment. Examples could include, for a child who is disrupting the classroom, Michael will gain teacher attention by raising his hand 70% of the time in the class period. For a child who is behaving inappropriately in group work or possibly using words that they should not be using in school, an objective might include, when participating in class group work, Emerson will contribute to the discussion in a relevant context and positive manner at least one time every 15 minutes, as observed by a teacher. If a child displays inappropriate behaviors despite having IEP that includes behavioral support, this may indicate one of two things. Either that the goals on the IEP are not the appropriate goals to meet the child's needs, or that the goals on the IEP are not being implemented appropriately. In this instance, the IEP team should reconvene and problem solve. They should question, are these the right objectives there to support the child? Or is the problem poor implementation? Or are the objectives not well matched to the child's need and intensity level? The next slide talks about the importance of using evidence-based practices. Fortunately for our viewers, both on the first symposium this year, the one last year that we did on positive school learning environments, and again, this time, there are several resources that we've gathered that will assist teachers, families, leaders in making sure that they have the skills needed to appropriately identify and deliberately choose and match evidence-based practices to the child's individual needs. And lastly, LEAs also need to consider the capacity needs of staff and what supports are needed for teachers and leaders in addition to what the student needs. IDA states that LEAs may also consider capacity needs of staff. So it's just not developing an IEP and implementing supports for the child, but what do teachers and leaders need and others in the system to be able to effectively support the child and their individual needs.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Bradley. Next, we have Melissa Turner, who is the Senior Manager for the State Policy with the National Center for Learning Disabilities. Melissa is part of the Public Policy and Advocacy team and supports parent mobilization and advocacy around issues that impact students with learning and attention issues, including policies related to the Every Student Succeeds Act. And Melissa will be presenting on supporting school success.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you to OSEP for inviting NCLD to be part of today's symposium. Go to the next slide, please. NCLD was founded in 1977, and our mission is to improve the lives of the 1 in 5 children and adults who struggle with learning and attention issues in the United States. We do this in a couple of different ways. The way that I primarily work on this is by helping parents get accurate information so that they can advocate for their children. I was asked to speak today about building a better IEP as a method of realizing the promise of the Andrew F. decision. As discussed earlier by the other presenters, and they covered it really, really well, Andrew changed a little bit what the standard is for what states need to do and districts need to do with their IEPs. So Andrew says that an IDEA requires an educational program reasonably calculated so that a child can make appropriate progress towards his or her goals. To tie this into the IEP, I came up with 4 key tips that I'll share right now. The first tip to making a better IEP is to make sure that it is standards-based. A standards-based IEP means that the IEP team considered the student's current performance relative to grade level expectations and develops the IEP with the goal of closing the gap between where a child is and where he or she needs to go. The second tip for today is to, and this has come up before in a number of the other presentations, it's to make a SMART goal. Using SMART goals in your IEP means that the goals are specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound. There's an example of a SMART goal up on the screen that you can see right now. But if you're curious and want to see more examples, you can go to understood.org and just plug in SMART goals. We've got dozens of examples for different content areas and different ages, which might be helpful for your district staff. IEP goals should not be vague or general. A SMART IEP goal will say when and how often a child's progress will be measured. It is important for IEP goals to be stated in a way that can be measured by standardized assessments, curriculum-based assessments, or other screening tools. SMART goals will help schools and teachers make sure they are meeting the standard of NDRU. The third tip for today is to support and encourage student self-advocacy. Self-advocacy is exactly what it sounds like. It's helping students have the ability to ask for what they need. Being able to be a self-advocate will help them succeed not just in an IEP meeting, but also in school academically, socially, and in their futures when they leave and go to post-secondary education and the workforce. School can help support students in building the necessary confidence to be self-advocates. NCLD has developed a series of self-advocacy materials, and I will share a link to that later on in the presentation. The fourth IEP tip is to meaningfully include student strengths in the IEP. We all know that IEPs must address areas of weakness for students in order to identify where they need help and to support them to grow and improve. However, sometimes when we focus on the areas of need, the IEP meeting can become somewhat negative and it can feel really intimidating to families. And we know that the IEP itself then might not help a teacher figure out how to help that specific student. When you add strengths into an IEP, specifically the skills where students excel or where they are confident, and use those strengths to develop and support growth in the areas of need, it provides more of a roadmap for teachers. It's a much more actionable document, and it also flips the script and makes it a better relationship between the school and the family. As discussed throughout today's symposium, the landmark NDRU-F decision changed the standard of what an IEP must provide and what we mean by FAPE. The decision in NDRU says that IDEA requires an educational program reasonably calculated to ensure a child to make appropriate progress in light of the child's circumstances. To fully implement this decision and support students in making appropriate progress, schools and districts need to review their IEP procedures and standards to make sure they're providing students with the right kinds of opportunities and experiences. Following the tips in today's discussion, making IEPs standards-based, using SMART goals, encouraging self-advocacy, and incorporating strengths into IEPs are just 4 of the strategies that schools can use to realize the promise of NDRU. On the last slide of the presentation, we have a list of resources that I referenced in this discussion. And so you'll see that we have an NDRU-F toolkit that is developed. It's largely parent-facing, but it will be useful to you to get a sense of what the advocacy community is sharing with other parents. And we also have a professional development toolkit that goes into more detail on strengths-based IEPs. And then we have a series of self-advocacy resources that are available for you to share as widely as you'd like. And then you also have my email address. So I want to thank you today for your time, and please be in touch with me if you have any questions or need additional information. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. So you've heard a lot today so far about the importance of self-advocacy, the use of data, meaningful student and family engagement, as well as the importance of great leadership, school leadership, as well as understanding the current policy. Next, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'd like to introduce 2 videos that will describe how students and families can and should be co-creators in the process of developing a high-quality IEP. The first video is from Nicole Bucka, which shows a parent's perspective. And the second is a video from Chris Coulston and Kevin Fortunato, 2 young adults who provide their perspectives on self-determination and the IEP process.
Hi, my name is Nicole Bucka, and I'm here to give you a little bit of a parent perspective with being involved in the IEP and any kind of educational process for students with disabilities. I'm an educator. I have been for my entire career. I'm a special educator. I teach English language development, and I've also been a general education English teacher. Currently, I'm an RTI coordinator at a school district, and I previously did the work at the state level as well. Special education is definitely, though, a passion of mine. In addition, I have 2 children with disabilities. Both of my children were born with autism spectrum disorders. Ethan, my 10-year-old, just turned 10, is what we would consider high-functioning autism or Asperger's. He's also twice exceptional. He has 148 IQ. He's over the 95th percentile in all standardized tests for reading, writing, and math. And he has a lot of social struggles and work completion struggles and compliance struggles. And the nature of his needs are communicative and social. My youngest son, who is 7 years old, Owen, he has more severe autism. He's nonverbal. He has an intellectual disability, he has a variety of medical ailments, and he also has sensory regulation problems. And he is in more of like a significant self-contained type setting. So we're here today to talk about the importance of parents being at the table. I thought, given I have 2 children and they're sort of 2 ends of a very broad spectrum, I thought it would be good for me to give the last example I can think of where I was at the table and it was really critical for each of my children to get what they need. So Ethan, the 10-year-old high-functioning child. The last time we were at the table, Ethan was, not unexpectedly, struggling with some behavioral problems at school. They had done a wealth of assessments, the BASC, he had come up with some oppositional defiant, clinically significant indicators, work compliance was an issue, argumentative, a variety of those issues. And the goals that were written in the IEP were mostly around social skills and then problem solving, understanding cause and effect, and making good choices. Because I'm lucky enough to be in education and therefore I understand the data and I understand the terminology, I was able to look at that comprehensive evaluation that was done and notice my son's strengths and weaknesses. So while he's clinically superior in all these areas, he is extremely low, like 10th percentile and below, on cognitive rigidity or flexibility, whichever way you look at it, and pragmatics, language pragmatics. And so in that IEP meeting, I was able to advocate for, but again, I'm not your average parent. I understand the data and I understand the language of the words we're using and how it all fits together conceptually. I was able to advocate that this solution, this problem-solving cause and effect, was not the nature of my son's problems. I said, he gets what's right and what's wrong, and he understands the consequences. He doesn't understand his own rigidity. He doesn't have words to put to it. He doesn't have strategies for how to handle it, and he dysregulates. He loses his ability to self-regulate. And so I found an intervention because of my background as a coordinator called Unstuck and On Target. And we as a team agreed to change the goal to that goal with that intervention and implement, and it has been amazing. He still struggles, but now we all have common language. He has strategies to pull from, and we all understand. And I think had I not been at the table, not been an advocate, if I had not known that that was not the nature of why my son struggles, and if I hadn't spoken up about that, then I think that he would still be struggling immensely much more than he is now. The second example is my youngest son, who's nonverbal and intellectually disabled. The last time we were at an IEP, his staffing, when you're as severely impaired as he is, it would really be optimal if staffing looped. Staffing doesn't loop. So every year we get a brand new team, new educator, new speech, new OT, new social work, just new everybody. I'm the only person at the table that has seen my son all 7 years of his life in every form of therapy he's been in and everything that works and everything that doesn't. So we were at the table and there's a speech pathologist at this school. Her reputation in this state is profound. She's the best of the best, and I was excited to have her. But at that first IEP, I had to say to her and to the rest of the team, my husband and I have made a decision that was a hard one for us. We are no longer trying to get my son to speak. He's going to be 8 years old. He's had the best, most intensive therapies, 5 days a week, 4 days a week, one-on-one, full hour, touch therapy, touch prompt therapy, the best of the best. We did all of our homework, paid out of pocket, you name it. He still is not speaking. Response to intervention, data says non-responsive for that long, let's move on. And so I had to say to this speech provider, it's not a reflection of you. I know you're amazing. I need this team to respect our family decision and to focus on the augmentative speech approach. We want the thoughts in his head, because he has a lot of them. We want him to be functionally sharing them across people in a setting in a functional way. And I had to ask the team to do that. And I want to say that this team was very receptive. But we have had that conversation with the team in the past, a different team, who basically gave me the yeah nod, and yet by the end of the year, augmentative speech goals had made very little progress. So again, another example of how the family knows the child the best, the parents. You have to speak up when you think something is wrong, and it's uncomfortable sometimes, but also the team has to be willing to hear you and it has to be a part of the culture. And then for significant disabilities, particularly like my youngest son, I think that we need to start with life goals in mind from day one, preschool, kindergarten. You know, for my youngest son, there is no shortage of things to work on. There are no shortage of goals. But I think that where we often disconnected was when the school would come to the table with each person bringing their own goals in isolation with no parent input or little. And then parent would be thinking long term what we want to accomplish, and that some of these things are just not as priority as others.
Hi, I'm Kevin John Fortunato, and I just graduated the Technical College High School where I studied early childhood education. I am NOCD certified, and the Pennsylvania Department of Education gave me this stamp of approval, baby. There is nothing on the certificate that lists my disability or what I can't do. Nope, just like you, I'm pursuing a profession based on my strengths and where I can shine. I'm a motivational speaker who happens to be on the front cover of the Delaware News Journal. I also empower students and educate families and teachers what transition planning really looks like when capacity is built in students.
My name is Chris Coulston. I was a VIP with an IEP, but now I'm an employee at Christiana Care Health Systems. I make a good salary, I file taxes. Look at me, I am IDA fulfilled. Building capacity means teaching students self-determination. When we focus on ability, it's amazing what we can accomplish.
So Chris, today we're going to talk about the importance of self-determination and transition. So tell me, when did you first go to your IEP?
Kevin, I first went to my IEP when I was in 7th grade in middle school.
So Chris, tell me, what happened in 7th grade when you led your IEP meeting?
I presented a 4-slide PowerPoint on my strengths, my goals, my interests, and what I need to be successful in the classroom.
So Chris, tell me, how did you feel during the meeting?
Kevin, I felt good during the meeting, like how the teachers and staff were talking to me, asking me the questions rather than my mom.
So Chris, you just got done leading your first IEP meeting. How did you feel after it was over?
Kevin, it was a good thing I went to that meeting because I had all the answers.
So Chris, you just got done leading your very first IEP meeting. How did your mom feel?
Kevin, my mom felt pretty good at the meeting because they were talking to me. And she said, we're going to be going places. And in fact, she said, we're going to Friendly's.
So Chris, why is it so important for you to lead your IEP meeting?
Kevin, it's important for me to lead my IEP meeting because I know the answers, and it's developing your voice. Like when you go for a job interview, talking to college professors, talking to your co-workers or manager or supervisor about an issue. Kevin, now I talked about what I did for self-determination, self-advocacy. How did you do self-advocacy?
You taught me that transition is all about being in the driver's seat of your own future and that you get to make all the decisions because it's your life, baby.
Kevin, tell me how you use self-determination.
I use self-determination every day. It's my oxygen.
Kevin, was it hard learning self-determination?
It wasn't hard. My mom had started to label the self-determination skills, and then eventually I started to make the connections: self-determination, self-awareness, problem-solving, informed decision-making. I'm bringing self-determination to my preschoolers because it's never too early to start. A way that I use self-determination is never, ever, ever giving up. One time I was at the gas station and I was trying to put the nozzle into the hole. I couldn't figure it out though, so I asked the woman next door to me if she could help me out, and I wasn't ashamed or afraid to ask for help because self-determination does not mean doing everything by yourself. You are allowed to have supports along the way.
Is it true that everybody can have self-determination?
Absolutely. No matter who you are, regardless of challenge, every single person deserves the gift of self-determination.
How about you, Chris? When you saw self-determination, what did you think?
When I saw it in others, I wanted to be that.
And you took the steps.
And I took the steps to obtaining to be a self-determined self-advocate.
Somebody has it. It's already in here.
Really? Okay, parents aren't there yet.
All right, well, welcome back, everyone. So I've asked our presenters to join us for a live Q&A. We've received numerous questions throughout the symposium, so we'll try to answer as many as we can. If you still have a question, please submit it in the Ask a Question box under the Q&A tab near the bottom of your screen. So this first question is for our Dr. Milton. The question is, what's been the biggest challenge to get parents involved in the IEP process and IEP meetings?
That's a good question. I think for students, especially as they progress and get older, parents have a harder and harder time finding a way to get involved in the school setting in general, let alone the IEP process. I think as a school, we have to do everything we can, including getting creative on reaching out to parents as many times throughout the year. As I said in my earlier portion, having those discussions all along the development of the IEP throughout the year and not just when we're preparing the draft. One thing that I ask my teachers to do right from the start in the beginning of the year is to contact parents right away and establish that relationship, make sure they know who their case manager is, introductions, offer to come in and meet with them personally so that we start to build that trust and relationship. Beyond that, offering flexibility of meetings. We really want to get the parents to the table as much as possible to continue those conversations, but even when they can't, making sure that we ensure their participation, ensure their input. And again, look at ways outside of school, even before school, to take time to talk to parents and listen to parents. And again, I think that's beyond just the case manager's role. That's also the school principal's role too, to be able to talk to parents about their questions, because oftentimes teachers aren't available right when they want to call. So letting me field some of those questions first and then passing that on and facilitating that discussion.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Dr. Bateman. Does the Andrew decision apply to just academic IEP goals?
No, not at all. And that's what really important part of the Andrew decisions. We have to realize that many of the problems that Drew was experiencing were behavioral issues. And what we have to think about is that not only just increasing academic goals for children with disabilities, but also increasing behavioral goals, which what we need to make sure is, because we get a lot of academic data on children with disabilities, but we also need to make sure that we take good behavioral data on kids with disabilities. So we need to make sure that teachers are taking data on the number of times a kid talks out, the number of times a kid is out of their seat, the number of times they're referred to the principal's office. In addition, and maybe even train paraprofessionals and aides to take some of this data to provide assistance as a part of this, because the teachers are often busy doing the instruction in front of the classroom. Behavioral goals are something we really need to change and focus on as a part of this, because as anyone who's worked in schools know that it's often behaviors that get kids more in problems than academic issues. So no, it's not just academics. Behaviors need to be clearly addressed.
Great. All right, thank you very much. We're going to jump a little. So this is for you, Dr. Long. What could IEP teams learn from IFSP teams about building partnerships with families?
That is a great question, and I was thinking of it when Dr. Milton was answering. I think a key to developing a really strong IFSP and a strong IEP is the team's ability to listen to families. We all know that families are the experts on their children. And we really need to open up and be available to them and ask them questions that allow them to talk to us. We often are so wrapped up in giving information that we don't take the time to ask questions that allow families to express what their concerns are, what their priorities are, and what they have available to themselves to help them reach those or meet those concerns. And they want us to support them. And listening is certainly the very first thing that we have to do.
Absolutely. Great. And this is for you, Melissa. How do you help educators start from a strength-based perspective?
So we talk a lot about how parents really are the first step in this. And so we advise that parents actually reach out to their child's teacher and say, let's talk about this. What is my child good at in school? Because that looks a little bit different than the things that the child might be really good at home. And so it's a different perspective on the child's whole portfolio of skills and abilities. And so we advise that educators and parents really work together to figure out what are the things that the child is best at, or what are those strengths that we can capitalize on in the classroom to really use those strengths to build in the areas where children need to grow.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And this is for you, Dr. Brown. So given the work of the multi-tier systems of support, how can schools ensure that students with disabilities are included in the MTSS efforts and supports?
Well, that is a question that we have been grappling with, but definitely as you work with Aspire and students who are involved in Aspire, as they begin to lead their own efforts and their own IEP, they make sure that they are included. They speak up, they advocate for themselves, and they make sure that whatever supports are available in the school, that they are part of.
Great. Thank you. Okay. And back to you, Dr. Milton. How do you develop an effective culture of co-teaching to meet instructional needs?
Again, as I said earlier, I think that the school administrator really has to facilitate this. It's not something that can always just happen naturally for a pair of co-teachers. There needs to be a long-term plan for and an investment in time toward that culture in your building, that climate in your building. It comes from scheduling all the way through the instruction that's happening in the classroom, the follow-up that happens. It's an investment in time. I know when I first started, again, my role was a special education administrator, and I think I went to a Maryland Friend co-teaching conference and came back and developed a 5-year plan. And that's about how long it took to change that culture and climate and truly create parity in the classroom. It's everything from little things to making sure both teachers' names are on the door and that both teachers are truly owners in the classroom, all the way through to really getting into the nitty-gritty of what instructional co-teaching models we're using. And again, that's a large part of my role in facilitating that. It's a lot of time and a lot of investment, and those things don't happen overnight. But I think if coming up with a good plan, and again, a long-term plan, and then going through everything from terminology all the way through the implementation of the instruction in the classroom, that's how you really can affect change.
Great, thank you. And this next question is for you, Dr. Long. Many parents don't know what their child's needs are. They want the specialist to tell them what to do. How do you engage parents in this process?
Well, that I think is a question that many of the providers have, that they assume that families don't know what they need. And oftentimes, families have been given the message that they don't know what their family needs. So they look to the specialist to tell them the answer. And again, I think this is the answer lies in having a conversation with families. In early intervention, we have a system of collecting information called routines-based interviewing, in which we actually ask families what they do during the day, what those barriers are to what they want to do during the day, and then we help them develop our list of priorities that they would like the IFSP team to address. But it starts with having that conversation of really opening up their ability to share with you what they do during the day and what perhaps, because their child is having some struggles, is interfering.
And it seems like all of you are doing something to kind of engage not only the students, the parents, but the schools. And I know when you talk about Aspire and the way you're engaging your students to really kind of take charge for themselves. And hopefully the students will go back to the parents and kind of engage them in their process and kind of really that self-determination of what you're talking about. So, so speaking of Aspire, what are the profiles of students participating in Aspire?
Well, we have all students in some of our school districts who are participating in Aspire. In fact, one of our large school districts, the superintendent said, this is right for students. It's right for all of our students. If we truly believe that Aspire means that students are engaged and leading, then that means even for our students who have the most significant disabilities, that they too will be involved.
Great, thank you. And to you again, Melissa. Now, what misconceptions have you heard about standards-based IEPs?
So I think with standards-based IEPs and strengths-based IEPs, we actually hear a lot that they're at odds with each other, that you can't do both, or there are some questions about whether or not you can do a standards-based IEP that has strengths. And the answer is yes, you can do them both together. I think there's some concern in the field that a standards-based IEP might not be appropriate for all students depending on their needs. We definitely hear that. That is a misconception. And so we really do push schools to think creatively about how they can help all students work towards grade level standards.
Great, okay. And the last question that I have, okay, this is for you, Dr. Long. You know, team members often say that their practice act doesn't allow them to do certain things like teach other team members strategies. Is this true? And also, how can we help teams collaborate?
So yeah, collaboration and the concern from many of the team members, especially the licensed providers. And in early intervention, unlike with older children, some of the primary providers are the physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech language pathologists who are licensed under each state. And they have a practice act that tells them what they can and cannot do. And some states are very prescriptive. Many states are very loose. And oftentimes the therapists are under misinformation that they feel that the Practice Act says that they cannot participate in role release or primary service provider models or transdisciplinary models. But when they look at their Practice Acts, they tend not to be true. They allow that. Certainly you would not want to teach someone something that is dangerous or requires the skill of a licensed therapist. Another area that I think that therapists and other providers need to sort of focus more on is collaboration and understanding how to collaborate with one another. One of the technical assistance centers that are funded by the Department of Education is the Early Childhood Personnel Center, which has looked at the competencies and standards across all the disciplines that work with children, young children from 0 to 5, probably even older. And they have found that there are certain competencies or standards that are across all disciplines. And there are 4 of these areas. Collaboration is one of them. And it's amazing when you open up to the providers and say, do you know, everyone talks about family-centered care. Everyone talks about collaboration. Everyone talks about evidence-based practice. We all do this together, and we need to share information among each other in order to create an integrated program plan for the children and families.
And collaboration is good. And just one of the things I wanted to emphasize too with collaboration is that collaboration isn't just about doing something together, but it's about doing something together to make a change and something that you're going to work together to make a change, whether it's you want to create common language or you want to do something that's going to have an impact on your other stakeholders. So I think when we talk about meaningful collaboration, that's always kind of something important to kind of emphasize. But thank you. This next question is for Dr. Milton. How would caseload look like? How would caseload look like when we, in your words, dream big and reach high? And the second part of that, if I can throw in the second part,
Okay.
what can states and districts do to support principals in schools? But let me just, the first part, how would caseload look like? What would caseload look like when we, in your words, dream big and reach high?
So I'm going to speak ideally here, as if budgets were not an issue. one of the things I think that I've spoken for years is that I feel sometimes caseloads are built on the number of students in a building versus the level of need. And I think that we have to change the mindset of how we're providing services to our students in the building. If we truly want to hold these high expectations, it requires time and personnel. And so often we're limited by budgets and we're limited by those pieces. We look in our school at again, when I'm building that master schedule, exactly how much time is needed and where those teachers need to be, and then where I can build in those collaborative pieces for them. But truly, I think we need to flip the mindset and start looking at caseloads built on how much time is needed versus the number of bodies that are on that caseload. Ideally, that would be my dream big,
Okay.
I guess, if that answers that question.
And then the second part is, and what can states and districts do to support principals in schools?
I think encouraging and providing that professional development. I know for me, when I became that administrative role, I was coming from being a band director and not exactly the same worlds. And I took it upon myself to really do as much research and educating myself as much as possible within even my teacher ed leadership program. I don't know that I would have gotten that same level of knowledge, background, and training if I hadn't done those things on my own. I think that beyond just the division leadership, even looking at ed leadership programs, need to devote more time to training us and providing information on good special education practices and resources. There needs to be more time. We spend a lot of time on assessment and data collection, but there should be a lot more time spent on that special education side because that's going to be one of our critical roles. And I don't know that we get that. When we move into that division piece, again, I'm fortunate. I do have this great leadership in my division, and we do have a really good vision and a lot of support. As many opportunities and encouragement, or I'm sending you to this training, I'm sending you to this this conference, so that we can bring back these ideas and look at how the instruction is happening in our classroom, and then continuing to have those discussions in the buildings. I know that my division pupil services director came out multiple months to my own building on my request, but she came and worked with my special education department, took time out of her schedule to do that. She made it a priority. And that constant conversation needs to be happening from the top down.
Great. Thank you. So this next question is for both David and Toby. Did I say that right? Okay, done. How should IHEs faculty embed information from Andrew within their programs of study?
Sure. What's interesting about this is that there's not a demand for competencies relating to special education for a lot of administrators, piggybacking on what you just nicely articulated. So a lot of administrators get to the point of being a building level or district level administrator, and they haven't had a lot of training relating to kids with disabilities. We have to realize that there are ways that kids with disabilities are part of the everyday landscape. And though they only account for about 14, anywhere, depending which state, 13 to 16% of the school age population, that they account for a lot of the time that they spend. And so we need to make sure, as part of practical experiences, as a part of their law classes, as a part of their instructional classes, as a part of their data collection experiences, that they realize that not all kids learn the same way and there need to be alternatives. But we also need to incorporate instruction related to UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. We also need to incorporate instruction relating to involving parents, getting parents heavily involved in the process, as I articulated earlier. There are competencies out there for principals, what they need to know about special education. We just need more people to incorporate them as part of what's going on. The hard part is most of these training programs cut their programs down to the bare minimum, but the principals and administrators often then suffer because they don't have the skills necessary then to perform their jobs. So we need to do a better job of not only providing pre-service instruction, but then also as part of practical experiences, hook up good administrators with future administrators with good administrators, so they can have the opportunities to experience those things.
There's one right here.
Yes. Yeah.
So, that's a really interesting question for the early intervention group, because oftentimes I think that people assumed, well, Andrew was not for Part C. It was a Part B decision. Right. However, it told us that we need to think high and aim high, like Laura said, for our kids, all kids. And when we think of it as young infants and toddlers and think of it within the context of participation, it opens up opportunities for things like universal design. If you think about how can I help this child participate in this library storybook group, I have to think very imaginatively rather than just saying, well, he needs to learn how to sit, because that's what he doesn't do on his developmental checklist. I want him to be participating by really enjoying himself, sitting being part of it. And I think that's one of the messages from Andrew, is to look at it that way. That's really high expectations for children, not just going through a list of developmental skills.
Excellent point. Excellent point. This next question is back to you, Dr. Milton. How do you work with other principals in your district to support systems change across other schools?
It can be tricky, but I think we meet regularly as an entire total staff, from the principal, all the principals in the buildings, along with the division supervisors and superintendents. So we meet monthly, and then from there we do breakout meetings. Again, it really starts with the division leadership, I think, for that collaboration. I know in our middle school principals meetings, we're often talking about instruction and what that looks like, including special education and who's doing what and how are you doing this. And again, data collection, and there's a lot of discussions. And from that collaboration, we take back ideas to our own building. But again, I think that starts with the division expectation of that collaboration. I'm fortunate that I work for a division that is highly collaborative. But so I think we process through a lot of ideas from philosophical down to the nitty gritty and how we're going to implement that in our buildings.
Great, thank you. And I just want to say thank you to the audience for the wonderful questions. These are really good. So this next question is to you, David. How do we set baselines for IEPs that are challenging, appropriately ambitious, and measurable?
Well, the first thing is that's a multi-part question. The first thing is establishing a baseline, making sure that we have understanding of where the child currently is functioning. So we need really good assessments from a team, not just from one person, but a team that looks at this process and understands the child and all the issues that may affect this child's education. That's the first thing. But the second thing is then try to determine where this kid is going to be. Now, people may not be aware of this, that special educators can predict the future. And what we have to do is when we write these IEPs, we are predicting the future. It doesn't work with lottery scores. I've tried. But what's interesting about this is what we have to do is we have to predict the future and then plan for where we expect this child to potentially be in a year. And but then, as I said earlier, if the child is not making progress appropriately towards that, what we then need to do is make sure that we then change what we're doing so that the child starts making progress. Not all kids move the same way. Not all kids develop the same way. Not all kids learn the same way. And the Supreme Court was really articulate about this based on in light of the child of his or her own circumstances. The development and progress of the development of an IEP is not based, there's no formula for how a child is how much progress a child is supposed to make during the course of the year, because children change, children's incentives change. So their motivations change, as also does their instruction change. So what I will look forward to do is extending this answer more in detail as a part of the final Q&A that's a part of this.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Melissa and Laura. What successes have you witnessed when families and students are focused on self-determination strengths?
Okay, I'll go first. What we notice is that students are very engaged. They set goals that are higher than the adults may have set for them. And when they are engaged like that, they make the choices, the compromises, and the decisions of how to reach those goals. And it might not have been the path we might have selected for them, but it's the path they choose, and they reach those goals. I'm not saying everyone does, but we see it at significant levels, and that they are more challenging to themselves than we might have anticipated.
I think that's right. We definitely see children who say, this is what I want to do. I want to focus more on science, for example. And we'll, and then we hear, well, sometimes the school said, well, no, you struggle with that a little, or that kind of a caveat, a little, slow down a little bit, and sometimes when the student is really able to advocate for him or herself and say, this is where I want to go, and to say to the teacher or the district staff, please help me get there, they can put their heads together and help the child figure out that path forward. And sometimes students do set higher goals for themselves, and then they often meet them. I mean, we all know this. When you set high goals for kids, they reach them. And so when they can set them for themselves, that's incredibly powerful.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to give a big round of applause to all of you as presenters. We really appreciate you being here. So as you as participants participating, we hope that you walk away with a few things. One is an understanding into what educators and leaders need to develop and implement high quality IEPs, how we can support these needs, We also want to remind you to don't forget to check out the resource collection that's available on the OSEP Ideas that Work website. During our final symposium, which will be held in October, we'll learn about how education agencies, families, and other stakeholders are working together to develop and implement high-quality IEPs. Additionally, I just want to thank all of our participants and thank you for all of your questions. Now, if your question wasn't answered by our panelists, we'll make sure to include it in the collaboration space, or make sure to include it in the collaboration space on the OSEP Ideas that Work site. And lastly, if you come up with a question after we close our meeting today, you can, again, log on to the collaboration space and add your question to the conversation. Again, thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your summer.